All right. Our next guest says, regardless of the Senate and House outcome, there will be large implications for the deficit. Let's bring in Evercore ISI, Sarah Bianchi. Sarah, great to have you with us. I do want to get to the deficit, and we were just talking about bond yields, but in terms of tariffs, that seems to be sort of the looming issue here over this, euphoric stock market rally here. What could that be? We've seen a lot of estimates from folks like the NRF saying it's going to add, 10% to the price of clothes, 33% to the price of toys. How do you think that plays out?
Well, I do think that a second Trump term will be very aggressive on tariffs. I agree that he is not going to implement 60% across the board imports on all imports from China or 10% across the board. But last time, President Trump took the tariff rate all in China from 3% to 10%. And I expect he'll be equally as aggressive this time, if not more so. I do think that they'll focus on particular sectors as they did last time and leave some of the consumer stocks perhaps alone. But I do think there's going to be very aggressive. And we think that the Trump trade team knows exactly what it's doing this time. It knows exactly where the authorities are. And we think most of it can happen without Congress's approval. So we think they will move quickly on a 301 on China and then start focusing whether it's on steel or the digital tax with Europe or Mexico, as the president said just a few days ago on the campaign trail. We think they're going to be fast and furious here, and everybody should be on alert.
Sarah, it's Tim. Thanks for joining us. From your policy perch, how about the Fed? And how about what Washington's thinking about an independent central bank that now has a different, at least, dynamic to really deal with? I mean, there was the prospect of this. There was the prospect of deficit unfriendly and inflation and higher yields. What do you think? Has anything changed for the Fed? Tomorrow, could we get a statement that at least is now reflective of a new paradigm in politics?
I believe that President Trump in his second term will really stay within by and large, the norms in and around the Fed. Obviously, unlike other presidents, he's chosen to jawbone the Fed before and be critical publicly. We don't typically see that from Republicans or Democrats. But I don't really, my base case at least, is that he's not going to do things like threaten to fire Powell or talk about how he needs any kind of authority there. That's our base case. We also think that he'll have at least a Treasury Secretary that is friendly to financial markets. But there are, of course, real risks that is not the path he goes down. And again, we do believe there will be a very, very active group inside the White House and in the cabinet, very, very focused on tariffs and immigration, which lead to things in our estimates around inflation and growth that the Fed's going to have to take a real look at.
Sarah, is any talk down there in terms of what potentially could, does this potentially give a green light for China to do something in Taiwan, or is that not something on people's radar screen?
I think China's been very much thinking about and preparing for both outcomes here. And it knows with really both administrations what it was going to get. I do think there's a lot of strategic thinking in China about how they will approach a second Trump term in and around tariffs, export controls, and a range of other things. My own view, a lot of different views on this in Washington, is that Taiwan and any kind of invasion or aggressive action there is not on that top of the list. We should certainly all hope so. I think that they are in their own set of challenges right now, and they have to figure out how to deal with, again, what is likely to be another trade war and tariff war with the United States.
Sarah, it's Karen. Thanks for being on today. So you said if they do some of these, what could be inflationary policies, the Fed's going to kind of have to look at that. But we're dealing with monetary policy and fiscal policy. What do you do if you're the Fed and you only have the tools that are available to you? Do you ignore what do you do? How do they proceed?
Well, I think generally what you see the Fed do is wait, in fact, until they see data and policy. So they are not going to be reacting today or tomorrow or really in January. They're going to wait and see the data what policies are implemented and what the implications are on inflation. We know with President Trump, there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of back and forth. He likes to negotiate by starting really large and then coming backwards. So I think they're going to wait and see how this actually plays through the economy and what economic data they see, and they'll make any decision accordingly. But the markets, businesses, you already saw the National Retail Federation coming out today saying, watch out with these tariffs. So the rest of Washington is gearing up for a fight.